The next panel discussion before afternoon tea will be on exponential innovation in fintech, and I would like to introduce the moderator, who probably doesn't need much introduction, James Brown. He's the General Manager for Fintech New Zealand and also the co-founder of InsurTech New Zealand. And he has a long-standing career in the financial sector, both in the UK and in New Zealand, and mainly in the wealth management part of fintech or financial sector. What some of you may not know is he was actually a professional golfer in his first career for about 15 years. So just quickly, what's your handicap now?
2.
2? Oh, it's still pretty good for my standards. So please welcome James Brown.
I don't play anymore. Can I please invite my panel to join me on the stage, please? Thank you. The last time I got up on stage, actually, where's Janet? There, she's there. She actually played James Brown music. Very embarrassing.
Very good.
I was telling someone actually just before we get started, and I know, conscious of time, some people may have heard this story before, but I actually changed my name when I was actually 12 years of age to James Brown. I mean, goodness, what was I thinking? First day of high school, and the teacher says to me, "Sorry, Mr. Brown, what do we actually call you?" And I sort of looked at her, you know, a little bit of a quizzical. And I thought, I don't know. Let's go for James. So I went home from day one at school, and spoke to the parents and said, "Yep, I'm in a good class. I've got a good teacher. Some of my mates are in there. Anything else?" And I said, "Well, actually, yeah, I changed my name." And obviously, I got a clip on the ear for that. And lo and behold, it's stuck ever since. But anyway, we do detract. It's been a really interesting sort of conversation this morning. So many different topics have been covered. Some really quite challenging questions have come from the floor, so keep those coming. But I just wanted to sort of give us a little bit of an overview, I suppose, where I see fintech in New Zealand, but where actually there's sort of some cross-pollination between obviously New Zealand and actually Singapore. We've had the privilege in the last couple of years actually of attending the Singapore FinTech Festival, and Haley and the team have done a great job. But over those 2 years, we've taken 40 companies actually up to the festival and seen it grow over the last couple of years into what is now just a phenomenal beast. But being up there, and I think Ian made the point in one of the sessions previously, being on the ground and having a presence definitely actually does make a lot of sense. But if we look back to New Zealand just for a moment, and you break it down, fintech actually is the fastest growing sector within New Zealand, 38% last year, and it literally outstrips any other sector within New Zealand, which is a phenomenal success. But now we're actually moving away from fintech to some extent. Fintech's a little bit old hat these days. What we're actually now talking about is green fintech. And for those that don't know about green fintech, actually come and speak to anybody on the panel, because we had a great conversation about it just a moment ago. And I think, Steve, I think we recognise that AI truly is in existence just on the back of that conversation.
Straight after the back of it, got an invite to a green financing conference in Sydney. And so someone's listening. I mean, I don't know how that happened, but the coincidence was just too great. So I'm spooked.
So bear that in mind when you're conversing with your friends or colleagues later on over a glass of wine. Be careful what you share. But sort of jumping into it, we know that we've got a thriving fintech sector here in New Zealand. Clearly, fintech is very much in the forefront of what's happening in Singapore, and Mass are doing a fantastic job. But if I can just sort of go through each of you, if you want to introduce yourself initially, but then just your views and your thoughts about what you're seeing actually in the fintech sector here in New Zealand, just to sort of kick us off. Steve.
Steve Wiggins, I'm with PaymentsNZ. For those who don't know what we do, we're a bunch of nerds who manage the rules and standards around how payments move through the system. So of those 7 trillion beautiful Kiwi dollars that go through the payment system, we make sure it gets from end to end. So that's what we do. And at the other end, we also do some innovative stuff, which I'll no doubt have the chance to talk about. Certainly with the work we do and the privileged position we have at PaymentsNZ in terms of dealing with both incumbents and people that are looking to join the payment system, we see a lot of activity happening within fintech, so I would see that as very vibrant. I think it's only got an upward growth path in terms of that point of view. I think it's something that we should be, as a jurisdiction, looking to support more to make sure that what we do here on the news is the growth of fintech not the milk solids price that goes through there. So we need to transition.
Kaye?
Everyone. Ko Kaye Dunn tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no te tai tokerau. Waikato Ngāti Mahanga me te tai rāwhiti, ngai tā manuhiri me Ngāti Kahunganu. I am the co-founder of Ahau. We're specifically looking at digital identity, the development of a knowledge repository for Māori and Indigenous communities. And last year, I worked with Māori Women's Development Inc. and we co-created in partnership with Pledge Me a crowdfunding, Indigenous crowdfunding program called Tā Koha, which was helping to bring a different type of technology to Māori communities that have been generally excluded from accessing capital. And we looked at crowdfunding as being a way to enable access. So my particular focus for today, I'm going to dance in between these lovely gentlemen, is really looking at what does financial inclusion mean, and how can we actually enable Māori and marginalised communities to not just be users of FinTech, but actual designers, co-creators, engineers of, and then I also hope owners of the technology too. So the opportunity for organisations like yours to partner with iwi Māori, I think would be very advantageous for you to consider.
Absolutely. Tēnā koutou. I'm Pete Weaver, I'm the co-founder of Ada. We're producing a digital assistant for small businesses. We using conversational AI and our algorithms, and we are opening up the opportunity for small businesses to actually have greater insights, make better business decisions so they actually can be more successful. We believe in democratising AI for small businesses. We believe that they need an edge. We believe they're actually incredibly vital to any economy. In New Zealand, it's 28% of our GDP, whereas in the States, it's something like 44% of their GDP. And we believe there is an opportunity with technology, with AI, with the use of cloud data, etc., to produce something a little bit different. And AI has got to a point where we can allow small businesses the opportunity to use the latest technology, have great conversations with their data, learn from their data, and literally get smarter and be more successful. So our view on FinTech, well, you know, FinTech's one of our plays. We play in the FinTech space, we deal with cash, therefore we deal with finances. But we deal with business success more than we deal with FinTech, if you know what I mean. So, yeah, we're very excited to give a small business an opportunity to have a decent crack at technology using something that's cool and affordable.
Kia ora, ko Dave Morgan, Ahau. I'm co-founder of Sust.io. Sust is a SME credit and analytics platform, both for business owners and banks and their relationships managers as well. We provide real-time credit score, credit capacity, and related business performance analytics as a white label hosted solution. So banks can take our product, relabel it, take components of it, provide it to their customer, gets them closer together. Everyone likes that. Really fortunate last year, and I was amazed when I went to Singapore FinTech Festival last year. It's just, if you haven't gone, you've got to go. What I saw was the massive opportunity we've probably got in this country to export a lot of the things to a global market we just haven't even thought of yet. And you go to those places, the size of those festivals, and you see what other people are doing, and you go, some of that's good, but you know, there are things I can think of, like velocity, for example, they're better. So we've got tremendous capacity and potential in this country to really start punching way above our weight. So I think we're going to have a talk about funding and what have you, and access to capital, and you know, sand pits in a minute, James. So
yeah,
part of the argument.
and I mean, and that sort of brings me actually quite nicely, I suppose, to one of the sort of themes that we want to talk about really is around regulation. We've had a lot this morning around MAS and obviously what they've done, but from your perspective, you know, we hear a lot around the FMA, you know, the particular stance around the sandbox, but we've also got some great examples actually of where they've really been a real partner actually on the journey. I don't know if Brooke is in the room from Sharesies. I know she's on the stage later. Where they actually sort of almost became a partner in the conversation about how they took their business actually to the market, which I actually think is something that we definitely need to share further and wider. But from a regulatory point of view, do you actually think we're geared up for success and scalability? And by the fact that we've had conversations with the regulators, Steve, I know you probably want to mention something around that. But what else do you think we need to do to encourage the framework that's actually going to allow us to actually scale some of the businesses up, like some of them that are sitting on the stage right here? Kaye, if I can come to you first.
Yeah, I think regulation is interesting, and as an entrepreneur, do you want to be over-regulated? What role does government play in keeping this proverbial sandbox safe? And then also trying to keep bad players out and ensuring that the end user or our citizens are safe and protected. And I think that's the purpose of what government can do and play in the regulation space. But I'm very interested to understand, even from a treaty perspective, what role do iwi Māori have in helping to design the regulations? A separate piece of work that Ahau are involved in at the moment, we're in the GovTech Accelerator. We're working in partnership with the Department of Internal Affairs, and they're currently in the development of a trust framework to enable the players in the digital provider space to be able to work side by side. And they're really interested in what is the iwi Māori perspective around identity. And I would just bring that across into this space, which is what is the regulatory requirements for Māori to be active participants and partners, and what does that look like, and what are also the expectations that we have of providers in this space delivering services to each of us. How are we also making it a requirement for providers to consider Māori engagement, Māori employment, Māori outcomes, Māori health outcomes, Māori social outcomes, and that lends itself to the wellbeing budget that Treasury released earlier in the year, and exploring how can that help shape the framework to enable not just to regulate, but I think it's a role to help us become better. And I guess the final point on that is, how can we ensure that regulation doesn't kill innovation? And that's, and I think that's a really interesting balancing point.
So you'd see the regulator being the enabler?
I would hope so.
Yeah.
I would hope so, but again, is it the enabler and also the adjudicator, and at what point?
Steve, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's sort of a bit of a bob each way at the moment. Is sort of what's coming through for me with the regulator in terms of the Reserve Bank uses words like more intrusive, more requiring, etc. Yet also on the other side wanting to have a very open dialogue with industry and work in partnership with it. So I do see a strong partnering ethos, but equally they do have a role to play as a regulator. FMA and RBNZ just announced a couple of hours ago in terms of how disappointed they are in the insurance sector, for example. So they've got a dual role, but they do need to work with industry, and I think there's an acceptance by the regulator that working with the industry collaboratively will deliver better outcomes for Kiwis. Having said that, at a session that FinTechNZ put on with all the regulators in the room, it was clear that there was not a lot of cross-pollination going on in terms of things in alignment. And there was also a bit of a reticence to actually get in and do stuff, thinking as though they don't have enough data and information to make the right policy decisions. So I think if they sort of loosen that thinking up a wee bit, get in and try stuff, and then we can work those other data gaps out as we are building it as well, rather than try and solve everything in one go.
Can I add to that? I mean, that's the problem. That's one of the problems for us. We've been in business a year and a half. We're building a solution. We need things to move quickly. I mean, someone talked before about the fact that if you wait for regulation to happen, for that fintech to be able to apply its trade, that fintech's gone. Right? And so you've got to be pretty mindful and pretty dogged and pretty focused on actually doing what you are going to do despite of what could come along with regulation. Because quite frankly, we know it's going to happen, or we know something's going to happen, but we have to pretty much ignore it because it's not going to move fast enough for us. So you've got to find a way to get around that. And we talked about sandbox before. I'm not sure that's a fill up into that, but absolutely, God, if we could do what Royal Bank of India is doing with their sandbox, developing that, or other global organisations are doing, developing their sandbox, that we can come in and play in a controlled environment with controlled data, risk-free as it were, in a short period of time. God, things would go a lot quicker, and more at our pace, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that brings me back to a point I sort of made earlier around the global innovation, financial innovation network that the FCA in London actually launched. That actually allows you to do that then, Pete, actually on a global scale. So depending on the jurisdiction you're actually looking at, it gives you, a distinct advantage to go out and play and test in new markets and learn. So definitely something I think that we can learn from our friends in Singapore, and whether we can encourage the regulators with more of the sessions that we ran a couple of weeks ago to actually adopt some of those as a methodology. But moving sort of on into sort of another area sometimes that's slightly challenging also in New Zealand, but has been slightly addressed by the 300 million that the government dropped in through the health and wellbeing budget, funding. Do we actually have a funding issue in this country, or is it just, to use one of the words that was used earlier on, just a myth? Pete, you look like, or Dave, both of you look like you're chomping at the bit there.
Well,
You go first. How much do you want?
I'll go 2 minutes, not even a minute. I'll try and keep this quick.
How much money do you want?
Just a couple of yards. I still think, sorry for saying this, I still think we're too much focused on the bricks and mortar mentality. It's changing. And because, I guess in the fintech space, our market's kind of quite limited onshore, you're going to need to have some strategic smart funding to get you that access to grow and expand. But you need to hook it up with sales and context and contacts overseas in those markets. All of us are going to be building products, or have built them, that, it's a great market to test, but the real return and the real realisation of your full potential isn't here, it's overseas. We're 4.5 million people. Sure, we look at Singapore as a great example, and I like the fact that they've stood up a sector in government to help promote the industry. That's fantastic. It's funded, it's communicated, SOP goes around the world, gives us the story about what they're doing, it's fantastic. We're playing catch up in that space. That's got to go with a strategy that enables funding quickly, whether it's onshore or offshore, but it's got to get out to market as well.
Yeah, but the tech in New Zealand, the tech in New Zealand is we're doing really well. We've got some great ideas coming through, and I think we're getting there. I really think that there's a global realisation of some of the VCs I've talked to in North America and Australia, that we actually need to have money in New Zealand, because we're getting a lot of money, a lot of ideas, and great fintech and other technology business coming out of New Zealand. Blackbird from Sydney bringing $30 million into New Zealand recently. I know 2 people in North America are bringing funds to North America, to New Zealand to support New Zealand technology business. That being said, it's still a challenge, because we haven't had the mentality and the years. Like, even look at Australia, they had superannuation going for quite some time, and a lot of those funds now are generating investments in the last 20 years in tech startups or other startups. And our superannuation schemes are still pretty much hamstrung on that. So there's a lot of money being held up that could be released, could be available.
Yeah, can I just plug someone for the great work that they've done, that I've seen them do, NZTE. They're really going out there, aggressively tackling a portfolio of companies in New Zealand and getting them access to conversations. A couple of weeks ago, a guy came down from the States, and he'd just spent that week looking at companies in the States. The first thing he said to us, not the first, but a couple of minutes, he said, the products I've seen here, the companies, you're just all over the guys I've just seen in the States. So back to that quality of our products. But NZTE are getting out there and getting contacts and really helping to make this happen as well. So I think it's starting. Actually is starting. So.
I feel that for Māori businesses, there's an issue here around equity. So with this recent release of 300 million in VC funds from the Crown, where is it actually going to land? And so there are so many Māori businesses and emergent Māori tech businesses that aren't even getting a look in for whatever reason. And so that's something that we need to be really exploring quite carefully is, are VC funds needing to be able to better serve more diverse communities? We're also thinking about women in tech as well, and ensuring that they get access to support. Not saying that you can't be a quality business, because you actually need to be able to make money and be sustainable and have global impact. But in actuality, access and equity is one of the critical issues that we're facing. And as an emergent tech business, we're finding it really, really challenging, not necessarily around accessing funds, but we're also stuck in a legal quandary in that in the social enterprise space, many of the law doesn't enable current philanthropic organisations to be able to make venture capital investments because the current structures don't enable them to. So that's another plug where money isn't actually getting out into the communities that need it the most.
Probably just an observation really from my point of view. The other side to it is also the capability of organisations to actually manage large amounts of funds in terms of investment. Fintech's inherently capital hungry, and so have those organisations got the right skill set to actually manage that growth and that future pipeline? That's really hard. And I've seen a couple that have really taken off because they do that capital management really well, and others that have just tripped up because they just don't quite have the right, whether that's the right advisors or the right support to actually pull it off. So yeah, it's a bit of both. I think there's a capability issue as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a couple of observations I would make as well is that we spoke to the Minister a couple of weeks ago. If you think that there's roughly about $180 billion across ACC, KiwiSaver and Superfund, we only invest 9% of that back into New Zealand. And my question was, through a policy change, could you actually just increase that to 10% and then drop the 1% into tech? And that basically would solve your problems overnight. So we've given that as a little bit of a challenge to go away and have a think about. But I think to your point then as well, Steve, that when startups actually are on their journey, to use Michael's business name, they're very focused on actually the product or solution or the problem they're actually trying to solve. And one of the observations sometimes I have is that what's more important? Is money more important, or is getting that right partner or that right advisory board more important for the longevity of the business? It's just something I think we should definitely consider as we encourage more and more people to set up a business here in New Zealand. But Kaye, you talked about financial inclusion. That's definitely something that resonates with me. With the emergence of new technology, there is this, there's a little bit of a worry in some organisations in government that actually we might, the gap between might actually get greater rather than less. And I just wonder actually if you've got a view about how do we enable or encourage the new technology to actually be more financially inclusive and actually delve into markets like, Brooks sitting up at the corner where the likes of Sharesies have opened up a door into a sector that, generally it was the wealth for the wealthy. But where do you see that at the moment and where do you actually see it going?
Well, it's tricky because, again, it's connected to other parts, and those other parts is around digital poverty. And so we can't be thinking about digital inclusion or financial inclusion if we are not considering, one, ready access to Wi-Fi, telecommunications and all the infrastructure behind it, and also ensuring that marginalised communities actually have access to quality devices. And that's a big challenge, especially if everything's moving into the digital space. And we're not just talking about marginalised communities, we're also talking about our elderly, very young, and those that, again, just don't have access. So that's a challenge of its own, but it also links itself to how is it that we are going to onboard these communities to access this tech. And so one of the parts that we're really committed to in our work is education. And I'm really grateful that Aisha's here from Te Wānanga o Aotearoa because they've been playing a significant role in educating not just Māori, but thousands of New Zealanders over the last 20, 25 years to understand the system and understand how to maximise opportunities. And therefore, I wonder if alongside the fintech space, are we also investing the same in education so that people know how to use these tools effectively? So I think that education is really important. And secondly, it's also about marketing. And so are you designing your products with a diverse community in mind? And one of the areas that we're focusing in on in the future is around the collective. So many products are really focused on the individual, but where are we going in regards to collective spending, collective purchasing, and if I link that back to the communities of Singapore, who are families, whānau, similar to here in Aotearoa, we're thinking about collective well-being, collective saving, collective sharing, and therefore is the fintech space also reflecting this heavy collectivisation, which of course also reflects the communities in Asia as well. We're collectives, and therefore are the products that we're receiving are collective focused.
Can I pick up something there? I think you're dead right. There's people think about financial inclusion as being, can I get credit? Can I process payments more effectively? Can I financial services or whatever? But I think the one thing you picked up, which I would like to pick up, is around education. I think that's a part of it. I mean, we were fortunate to be selected as part of MasterCard's Global Accelerator Program, and they've put a lot of money into a thing called, they got a global program for inclusive growth. And they had examples of this, some young ladies in India who were running shops, etc., but they weren't doing a great job of it, but they got a group of women together in the village and a bit beyond, and it helped all these ladies in this village actually take care of their families more effectively. They weren't saving a lot of money, they're still saving a lot more money than they were before, but it was all around education as to how to run this business, and it was part of this an inclusive approach. So it's not just, okay, I need more capital to grow my business, therefore how can I get some credit easily? It's actually how can I get information as well? So we've got to think of it that way. And I think your point around what we can do in New Zealand, absolutely. I think there's a lot of great ideas, let's say, coming out in the regions with Māori or whatever. And it's like giving them the opportunity to take their ideas and do something with it. And I think that's where we can help out a lot more effectively as well.
I mean, I think for me, if you think about financial inclusion, financial literacy, if you then move that sort of a couple of decades forward, we have a major issue actually here in New Zealand around small businesses falling over because of cash flow. So if we're not catching it early enough, we're actually only creating a problem for ourselves in decades' time. And then by the fact that if we think about the last government budget was mainly around health and well-being, what's the consequences when someone's running their business and they're actually feeling that sort of pressure? But I want to shift just ever so slightly into payments because, and I know Steve would obviously like this. Years gone by, we were really, really good at payments. And I still find it quite fascinating that we still gravitate sometimes actually towards the US to look for new opportunities and new products and new solutions, especially within financial services, but by the fact that they still actually give you 4 checkbooks when you open up your bank account. It still baffles me to this day how they've done such a great PR exercise. But 30 years ago, we created FPOS, and all the players were clearly at the table and wanted to participate, wanted to collaborate. What do you see the sort of the future payments in New Zealand, but more broadly, actually, what do you see the future of payments actually across the globe? Yeah,
interesting one. I mean, it's always touted out FPOS as what made New Zealand payment system great, and I think it's fair to say that we have fallen behind in some areas and need to catch up. We're one of the few regions within the OECD that doesn't have a real-time platform. And then a lot of that looked to the innovation in the US, and I think your point about the 4 checks, that's because their core system's rubbish. So I think we've still got a good system. Having said that, FPOS at 0 fees to merchants, there was only ever one outcome in terms of over the longer term. So that's certainly recognised. I think where the industry is heading is certainly around off the back of the great term open banking, looking at what are the other alternatives around payments that can be delivered to the market. And particularly with the adoption of payment initiation APIs and account information APIs, how can we use those tools to, say, for example, deliver real-time outcomes for Kiwis? So I think the industry definitely recognises that there is work to do, and hope to be announcing soon the shift from 5 days to 7-day settlement. I mean, that would be a really good starting point, that we've got an economy working 7 days a week, not 5, and shuts down on Saturday. So yeah, we've got some work to do, but we're on the right path.
Views from the rest of the panel?
Just worry, I guess, about, I think payments and the cost of payment transactions, but I also really excited about what the potential blockchain can mean to payments and making it much more faster, quicker, and that's what people are seeking. But I have this concern. I hope there's nobody in here that is the founder of Afterpay or involved in that, excuse me, but I'm really concerned about debt, actually, that, you know, we're looking for opportunities in the fintech sector, but we're also really riddling New Zealanders with quite significant debt, and a system like Afterpay, which means I can pay that off later, but in actuality I don't, and then I'm getting slammed with fees, and that is a business model that's actually hurting New Zealanders. I'm just interested in that and what that means for us as a country.
Just talking about open banking, though, I mean, you look at the situation in the UK where it was clearly regulated, and you've still got a number of the banks dragging their feet. Australia went live back in July. If you had a whiteboard, how would you design it for New Zealand, based on regulated or industry-led or a combination of both? What would be your view?
Well, at the moment it's been industry-led with the opening of the API Centre and the launch of the two standardised APIs at the end of May. And so it's up really to the industry to demonstrate that they can actually deliver better outcomes for Kiwis off that construct. Do not think a regulated outcome is the right way to go. As someone said, we're a really close geography. We tend to know each other. There's a small number of incumbents. There's a very vibrant number of third parties. We need to make this work, and we've started that journey. So let's give it some time. I mean, there was an interesting comment. People are getting, say, oh, it's too slow and all that rest of it. But the view certainly from some of the incumbents is we need to do this right, not just do it. So don't want to fall into the trap such as the likes of, say, the UK jurisdiction. As you said, some are still dragging their feet. Australia's still not live for another year, by the way. So we're ahead of the pack on that one. And we just need to learn as we go and make that happen. So the intent is there. We just got to turn that into reality.
So we've been talking for a little bit. Is there anybody in the audience that's got a burning question? It's always that sort of scary thought where you think, I'll ask, and if nobody puts their hand up, it's the sort of the death of silence. But good on you, Andy. Well done.
Thanks, James. Given the panel's called Exponential Innovation in Fintech, I mean, Kaye already touched on it briefly, but I'm surprised there hasn't been more discussion about digital currencies. There's obviously a lot of activity around the world, and not just Libra. So we're looking at moving from legacy payment infrastructure to asset transfer on the blockchain or on a distributed ledger. It's a radical shift, and it may be done to us. So just interested in the panel's perspectives on that. I know both the Singaporean currency and the New Zealand currency in the top 10 traded currencies in the world. So Singapore are not looking at it. That's the latest, that SOPS gave us yesterday. So I'd be interested to see what the New Zealand perspective is.
Yeah, I mean, just before the sort of panel jumps in, I think it's interesting, and it touches a little bit on the sort of the data or the data, depending obviously where you're from. We had the opportunity in our wider ecosystem to sit down with Facebook, and the one piece of information that I actually thought was very intriguing was the fact that they actually hold, on average, 28,000 data points on each person on their platform. And in an audience like this, with large, complex organizations, I said the same thing. How many data points do you hold on your customers? And there was very few actually knew the answer to that question. So I suppose it's the quandary, isn't it? When you've got large tech organizations that are very good at the manipulation and the commercialization of data, and then you've got other organizations that have got an abundance of it but can't necessarily extract it to commercialize it. So yeah, leading into that, I mean, that's a really interesting question that Andy's posed. I mean, I don't know, Dave, if you've got some views and some thoughts on that.
Not on blockchain, other than to your point about leveraging available data. And I can just talk from our platform alone. We need a lot of data points to get the outcome we need, and that's where a lot of us are finding value in building products for industry. So I don't think it's going to go away, but plugging things into blockchain, are we ready as an economy to really jump into that yet? We're sort of still in our fledgling state, aren't we?
I don't know whether we're actually ready right now. I mean, I think that where there's opportunities for that digital value, digital asset transfer at some point. I know that even our company, we've looked at that as a future play. That's why, all transparency and centrality is one of our investors. I mean, we think about that play down the track with respect to how we can get a community play and actually allow them to transfer asset to each other in a trusted way. Absolutely, and we see blockchain as a technology that can present that opportunity for us. But again, it's one of those opportunities that we've got to explore. It's too early for us, I know that for sure, but I think that around the world it certainly has its place. I certainly know in your space it would certainly be pretty useful.
You'd hope as a trade economy we'd find a really great way to use it, like with outward, Troy. So, you know, there's potential to really leverage it and use it properly to benefit everyone.
I think that decentralised technology is leaning towards what I see as a trend, and that's actually consumer-driven financial systems. In that choice, option, the younger populations are not necessarily trusting banks anymore. We've seen that since the last big crash. So individuals are saying, I want to own my own data, and I also want to control my own money, and I also want to be able to transfer it without being bogged down with significant amounts of fees. And therefore, just putting it out there that in regards to the sector or the industry, there has been a monopoly in this space for some time, but now individuals are actually starting to come through and say, actually, we want to take control, and I would like to be able to manage my own payment gateways in a way that suits me and my family. And I think if we're not listening to that or looking for opportunities in that space, we might be left behind as a nation.
Yeah, I almost like the way that blockchain can be used for the digital identity as well. So you get organisations like Sentinel allowing farmers in developing countries to use cows as collateral. That sort of stuff's really important. That's amazing. So it comes down to someone saying, I've got 10 cows, I don't know what I can do with them, but I can use that. I can use that as collateral against my digital identity to help me fund my business, to help me grow my farm. That sort of stuff's really important. Application in New Zealand, can't comment.
Yeah, Exponential's interesting, and certainly in the payment space. I mean, I just look at Alibaba, their switch during Singles Day, they're transacting 270,000 transactions a second. So that's pretty cool. They're now building a system to do 1 million a second. So I'm not too sure what the count rate is for a blockchain payment. I think it struggles at about 8 or 9. So there's still some really cool, exceptional stuff happening with existing technology as well. So it's about getting the balance right and getting the use cases right for the technology.
Yeah.
Just think that's a big number.
It is a big number. And I think also actually, I hear actually a little bit less and less of actually the conversation around blockchain, the actual physical term, and actually more about what the platform actually enables. And I think if we do more of that, we'll actually start to see more adoption. But I'm just conscious of time. Is there any other questions? Nope.
What I would strongly encourage is to not get carried away by the poor narrative blockchains happening on the public space. I'll give 3 examples are real as we speak now. And I was speaking yesterday that in Philippines there are many small towns where the banks are not connected to the mainstream payment system. By end of this year, immigrant workers in Singapore using OCBC can send money over a blockchain and a wholesale cryptocurrency network to a Union Bank of Philippines, who then over a private network can transfer the money instantly to the small villages which have small town banks not connected to mainstream banks. Real production, meaningful, solving a real problem. Second, there's another company out of Singapore who is now creating tokenized livestock. So, 70% of world's food supply comes from small farmers, and they need credit. And the only collateral they have are livestock, goats, cattle. And these are not used typically as a collateral for getting credit. So this company is putting tokens behind this cattle and livestock and using this as a secured collateral to get more credit. So there are real good examples. I think in the inclusion side, we should push hard and put real public and private partnership to drive this economy.
Thank you. I'm just conscious of our time, but one subject I would like to just sort of finish on then, AI. So we all know the robots are coming. We know that 42% of jobs in New Zealand will be defunct. It just simply isn't the case. If I actually look at some of the statistics coming out of the UK only a few weeks ago, If you compare FTE and what they call traditional financial services and then fintech, fintech's growing at 300%, just under 300% more in the creation of new jobs. So in terms of the panel and just looking at the clock, what's your views on AI, its place in society, creating inclusion, and its role within financial services?
Well, technically, parts of AI and ML have been in play in banking for a long time. Those questions and answers you get asked on your mortgage application, which shouldn't be in paper, it should be digitised anyway, see me later, or your business loan, that feeds decisioning engines. There's coefficients and variables sitting behind that, and if you lengthen the span of data you collect through it, you're going to get different variable answers, and you can train your models to say, well, you know, across this time span, we're seeing this take place, therefore change, and through summary form. So it's there now, but it's not really being pushed out fast in front of the client just yet.
I've got a general and a specific. I mean, general is that it's been proven that the best decisions are made by the best human and the best AI. They're not made just by the best AI or just by the best human. And so it doesn't mean, it's not that AI is going to replace them. It's a case of it's going to give you better answers, but you've got to have the human for most of the time, right? In our specific case, we see AI freeing people up. We see AI allowing people to be more productive, allow people to make better decisions on data. We've got machines doing the work on the data. That makes sense because it's decisions, it's time that a human shouldn't spend doing. They want to do other stuff, running their business, coaching the kids' football team, whatever it might be. But it frees up time. That's just one angle of it. And I think from a perspective, AI is here, absolutely. It's going to get better, going to get stronger, going to be more relevant. And as I said, it's going to become more and more available to everybody. And I feel like, it's absolute gold, and we should just embrace it and go with it.
I think for me, or for our team, you know, we've been talking quite at length around potential inherent bias of AI and the importance of having Indigenous or kaupapa Māori values imbued in the algorithms of AI. What does that actually mean? It means that we need to be training, nurturing and supporting amazing computer engineers to build the AI and also explore what is the type of value set or data sets or data points that we're programming the AI with. Because AI can, like any tool, can work really effectively, but also if left on its own, it can also create quite significant damage. So, you know, I always think about the Terminator and the end of the world with potential runaway technology. But I also think I agree with you that it's with humans, it's in partnership with humans. If it can help make our lives better, then that's awesome. It's just ensuring like to whose standard and who's controlling and who's designing it.
And Steve, the final word to you.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. I think, you know, the more data we start to access and look and combine, clearly AI has got a role to play into the future. Yes, I do think can deliver and has a role to play in those social outcomes. I think a couple of really good examples of that is, even if we look at the conversation around open banking, the last 18 months it's gone from open banking to open finance to open data, now to open life. Because seeing that combination of payments, banking information, hooked with electricity, hooked with your education and health data, can deliver better outcomes for citizens by doing that. So go and have a look at the Deloitte platform DOT out of their Sydney office. That is really at the cusp of where they're taking that. Their catch cry is how do we make the invisible visible and dragging people up from the bottom, really powerful. And on the super data nerd side, the Finance and Data Technology Association out of Edinburgh, in conjunction with the government, is doing some really groundbreaking stuff there in terms of how we manage and access data for the better outcomes for society. And so it's there, and it's going to be great.
Go the Scots. Well, a lot of subject, a lot of content covered there, but really appreciate your patience, and the panel will be here later and obviously tonight. But if you can join me in thanking the panel for their insights, thank you.